Hello, I'm Daniel Mills, and in this presentation I'm going to introduce you to the psychometric scales that have been developed at Lincoln. And then my colleague Kevin McPeak is going to take you through how you can access these freely through our IP store at Lincoln. There are 5 Canine psychometric scales that are freely available through https://ipstore.lincoln.ac.uk. These have all been developed at the University of Lincoln through the Animal Behaviour, Cognition and Welfare Group by various authors. And if you go to the IP store, you can find information about the individual scales and the background and the degree of validation that they've undergone. The first is called the positive and negative activation scale, and I'm going to talk briefly about each of these in turn. This basically assesses sensitivity to rewards and aversives, what's sometimes referred to as core affect. Next is the DIAS, or the Dog Impulsivity Assessment Scale. This was largely developed by one of my PhD students, Hannah Wright. Then there is the Canine Frustration Questionnaire. This was largely developed by another of my PhD students, Kevin McPeak. Then there is the Lincoln Sound Sensitivity Scale, which, like PANAS, was largely developed by myself and a colleague, Jill Shepherd. And then there is the Lincoln Canine Anxiety Scale, which has been developed out of both the Lincoln Sound Sensitivity Scale as well as some of the clinical work that I've done. And there have been quite a few colleagues involved in that process, including Kevin, who's going to do the second part of this presentation. So let's go through each of these in turn. The Positive and Negative Activation Scale, or PANAS, consists of 21 items. And there are 2 main scores, one for what we refer to as negative activation and one for what we refer to as positive activation. Basically, negative activation is sort of fearfulness, and positive activation is sensitivity to rewards. And these give us insight into the general predisposition of the individual. Please note, these tools should really be used as an aid and not alone to make a diagnosis. So this tells us about whether or not an animal is fearful and whether or not it's very sensitive to rewards. Sometimes these are thought of as opposite ends of the same spectrum, but actually the two are totally unrelated. It is possible to be very sensitive to rewards, but also very sensitive to punishment as well. And it has been found that, not surprisingly, animals that suffer from fears are more likely to score high on negative activation. However, when it comes to treatment success, it's not the negative activation score that actually predicts the likelihood of treatment. It's actually the positive activation scores. And animals that score very high or very low actually are much more challenging to treat. So these can be very useful if you're concerned about your animal's temperament. The next scale to consider is the Dog Impulsivity Assessment Scale. Impulsivity assessment involves evaluating the degree to which the animal is thinking about the consequences of its actions. We make better decisions if we reflect beforehand, but we all vary in our tendency to act without thinking. And the same goes for dogs as it does with people. So animals with that are more impulsive generally lack self-control. This scale consists of 18 items. And there is one main score for the item, but there are also 3 subcomponents. In the case of the PANAS scale, the negative activation only has 1 element, but the positive activation has 3 elements. The degree of reliability of those 3 sub-elements in the positive activation may vary from culture to culture, and that's why I didn't spend much time talking about that. But in the case of the DIAS scale, these 3 factors can be quite useful. They give further insight into the nature of the impulsivity. The first factor relates to behavioural regulation. The second to the dog's tendency for aggression and response to novelty. And the third factor relates to the dog's responsiveness. So if you log on to the site and you use the scales, you'll get a score for overall, but also for the individual components. And there is some advice given to you about what you can do in those situations as far as interpreting them and what help might be required. Let us now look at the Canine Frustration Questionnaire. Frustration has perhaps been overlooked quite a lot in favour of anxiety. And actually, in common English, we often use the word anxiety to describe a frustration as well. So, for example, if you're not sure whether to approach or avoid something, people talk about it being anxiety when it is perhaps better represented as a form of frustration. So, the common terminology can be confusing. Here we're concerned with situations where the animal's autonomy or ability to control its environment are limited in various ways. So basically, whenever an individual is thwarted from obtaining something they're motivated to gain, then we can expect them to be frustrated. That could be that something is absent, that they get less than expected, or that rewards are delayed. But it also happens actually when animals are restrained as well, or when individuals potentially enter their territory or personal space. So there's a wide range of situations that can trigger frustration. This scale consists of 21 items, and it is divided into 5 components. The first assesses general frustration, the second barrier frustration, so for example the dog's ability to cope with being on a lead and other frustration barriers like a fence, etc. The third describes tendencies when the expectations are not met by the individual. The fourth, the individual's control of its responses. And the fifth one, its ability to cope. You will also get an overall score, and that will give you an idea whether or not your dog has a problem with frustration. The 5 factors help to identify specifically where that might be. The Lincoln Sound Sensitivity Scale was developed in order to look back at how sensitive or reactive dogs were to sounds, particularly fireworks. And it basically looks back at a period of time and asks about both the frequency and intensity of a range of different behaviours. There are 17 behaviours considered, plus an 18th option as well. So, as illustrated in this slide, you might be asked about running around, and whenever the noise occurs, when does that occur? Never, rarely, frequently, or every time. And then also how intense the behaviour is. So how intense is the running around? Is it just a small amount, in which case you'd score it just at 1? Or is there an extensive amount, it's continuously running around whenever it hears the noise, in which case you'd score it at 5? And of course, you can use any number in between. The score is calculated by multiplying the intensity by the frequency for each sign and then adding them up. And generally a score above 30 is often used as a threshold suggested for seeking help in these situations, because it indicates that the behaviour is either occurring at a very intense level in a small number of signs at least, or it's occurring at there are lots of signs that are occurring at a very low level, suggesting that the animal is quite sensitive, and they may require different treatments. But that's a general guide that is used there. Finally, there is the Lincoln Canine Anxiety Scale to consider. This scale actually assesses an individual incident. So rather than a collection of incidents, like the Sound Sensitivity Scale, this just measures the response to a specific event. This makes it quite useful for monitoring your dog's response when it's receiving treatment, or if you are concerned about how things change, perhaps as the fireworks season starts to develop, you think your dog's responses are getting worse, and this will help you in that situation. So there's no frequency score, there's just a severity score relating to 16 signs. and the total score, you add up the severity for each of these. You can score your dog at baseline before you start an intervention, and then you can monitor it as you give the intervention. So for example, if you're trying out a supplement and you want to see whether or not it's really having an effect. If you're going to do that sort of experiment, please be mindful of your animal's well-being, and really to test it, you do have to have the animal both on and off the supplement at different times in order to see that the effect is repeatable. Only then can you really get an idea of whether or not that supplement is helping. Many animals may require treatment with more potent interventions, so for example medication. So please don't hesitate in contacting your vet in order to discuss the situation and see what further help might be available. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Kevin McPeak, who will take you through the process of how you actually set up an account and download the individual scales. Thanks.
So I've briefly gone through the 5 different scales that are available. Now I'm going to explain to you how you can access these scales online. So the University of Lincoln has an intellectual property or IP store. You can access it at the website provided here. And when you click on this link, this is the home page that you're taken to. The first thing you need to do is to register an account. So to do so, you go to the top right hand of the page and you click on the register button, and then you'll be asked to enter your details, your name, your email address, and agreeing to terms of use of the website before clicking continue. Once you've completed this step, you'll be emailed an activation code. The activation code lasts for 24 hours, so it's important to retrieve that from your email account and then either follow the link within the email account or copy and paste the activation code over into this line and press continue. The next step is to set a password and activate your new account, which can be done here. And when you press activate account, you'll have a green light appear that thanks you for activating your account, and you now have a registered account. Then all you have to do is to go back to the home page and sign in with your email and password you set up in order to get into the tools. You'll know that your account's set up because your name will appear in the top right. This is an example from the account that I have set up. So next we're going to look at how to actually access the assessment tools we've just discussed. So if you go to the assessment tools section, which is the central picture here of the human head with the cogs in the brain, and then you'll be taken to this page and just simply click on online behaviour calculators, which is a picture of the 3 dogs on the top left corner. On this page you'll see that the 5 scales we've discussed are listed, so the LCAS, DIAS, PANAS, Sound Sensitivity Scale and Canine Frustration Scale, and there's a clickable link to take you to each one that you want. As an example, I'm going to run through how you can access the PANAS. So if you click on PANAS, you will then have an overview of what the PANAS is, how it can be used, and how many items and the scoring for each. In order to access the PANAS, you go to the top right hand corner of the screen and you press Order Now. That will add the PANAS to your basket, and if you go into your basket, you'll know there's something in it with the little yellow number 1 beside your basket, and you can check out now in order to go through the steps for registering for PANAS. The next steps are filling in more details about yourself. So your email address should automatically appear because you've already registered it, contact phone number, organisation details, and you do have to enter billing address information, although it is a free license, so it's just for information on the website. Once you've entered this information, you go to Save and Continue, which is the blue tab on the right. It's important that you review and agree to the terms and conditions of the free license. This can be done on the next page. You can have a read at the terms and conditions and then click I understand if you accept those. Once you've gone through that process, you now have access to the PANAS. You can either access it in one of two ways. You can click on the link for the PANAS, which is visible within the red writing here, which can be done directly from the IP store, or you can, and that takes you to this link, dogscales.lincoln.ac.uk, specifically for PANAS. Now, when you click on the link, this is an example of the page that you're taken to. It is a page where you start entering details about your dog's behaviour. So the first part you have to enter is your dog's name, your dog's breed, age, sex and neuter status. And after that page you then will go through each of the 21 items comprising the PANAS, and you give your Likert scale response for each. Once you've completed the PANAS, the system will automatically calculate your results for the negative activation overall questionnaire score and the positive activation overall questionnaire score, as well as the three sub-factors I described earlier. There's a brief summary of your dog's results in relation to the normal range, which are listed here, and there are further links provided, particularly linking to a paper describing the link between chronic pain and behaviour problems. So if you want, you can take a screenshot of this page. If you have asked a client to complete the PANAS, you can ask them to take a screenshot of the page, but this is the page they'll get, which summarises the results. It means that you don't have to manually score the PANAS results for each case. Another thing to note is that with the PANAS there is additional forms that you can download. So aside from doing the online version of the scale, you can download a PDF version of the scale and the calculation forms, as well as a scale interpretation document which explains a bit more about interpreting the results. So these can be downloaded from your IP store account. So if you have a need to use the scales with a PDF and you're happy to manually score them, you can do so using these documents. So it's important to note that in order to, if you want to access all the scales, you have to repeat the registration process for each scale that you require. You can't currently add more than one scale to the basket at a time. However, your registration details are remembered, so if you log in, you don't have to re-enter those every time you wish to add a scale. You can access all the scales you have a license for by going to the My Orders section in the top right hand of the page. If you click on My Orders, this is what you'll see. So in my account, I have all 5 scales which I've registered for. And in order to access those again, I just simply go into the View Detail clickable blue link at the right hand side of each row.